Good morning. You're watching Businessworld Live. I'm Danie Laurel. It's the start of a new trading day. Let's kick off with our top story. The national government plans to borrow more than $3 billion from multilateral lenders to fund projects aimed at helping the economy recover from the pandemic. Now, documents from the proposed 2022 national budget show that the government looks to tap the Asian Development Bank to the tune of $2 billion over the next 5 years. Now, the loans would bankroll projects in local governance reform, universal health care, and post-pandemic employment recovery, among others. The government will also ask the World Bank for $433 million in loans. That's to support 2 projects next year, including disaster resilience. The Philippines also plans to tap JICA, or the Japan International Cooperation Agency, for over $280 million for the emergency support loan mechanism of its pandemic response. Meanwhile, the country's budget deficit narrowed by more than 13% to 121 billion pesos in July. Revenues inched up by 9.2% to 256 billion pesos, while increased spending was just 0.7%. Now, the muted government spending was attributed to high base effects last year when the government was still implementing its cash aid or ayuda program and subsidy releases. Now, speaking of ayuda, 75% of the ECQ cash aid has been successfully distributed to qualified beneficiaries in Metro Manila. The DILG says that translates to 8.4 billion pesos worth of cash aid already doled out to ECQ hit individuals. LGUs who are not yet done with the distribution are given until the end of the month. That's to finish handing out the ayuda. Meanwhile, vaccine czar Carlito Galvez Jr. said about 41 million vaccine doses have already been deployed to various LGUs. That is from the total 48.5 million vaccines that have arrived in the Philippines. The government and health experts have been pushing for a faster vaccine rollout in a bid to curb severe and fatal cases of COVID-19 here in the country. Now, let's take a step back and rethink how the pandemic is going on elsewhere. We've been entrenched in our domestic woes, and sad to say, not good elsewhere either. And get vaccinated, stay vigilant seems to be the theme around the world. You can see on my Bloomberg terminal here, the global equities. Goldman Sachs and UPS actually joined the ranks of companies which were requiring the COVID-19 vaccinations for their workers. And another bad issue here is the effectiveness of vaccines. Now, among the frontliners, that declined to 66% after the Delta variant became dominant compared with the 91% efficacy before it rose. This is according to a new report from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention over in the US. Now, if you take a look at Singapore, they're also saying that those migrant workers who recently tested positive in a dormitory were all fully vaccinated. They were either asymptomatic or had mild symptoms. You've also got in Europe, Greece posting its biggest one-day increase in infections. Switzerland also reporting a surge in hospitalizations. And finally, you've got Indonesia's total cases reaching 4 million. Now, still, you can see on my terminal that the S&P 500 did hit an all-time high. That was based on the earnings and outlook, as well as the commodities climbing on the demand outlook. Despite, of course, all of these infection woes, Asian stocks as well seem to be edging here in positive territory upon at least 3 minutes into the open here in the Philippines. Let's take a look at our own bourse. We do seem to be going against the grain and sliding a touch. We're at 6677.87. That's a bit flattish, but nevertheless towards the negative side. Let's take a look at our sectors and which ones are really dragging the bourse here. Incidentally, properties, which I've been looking at this morning, the biggest drag to the bourse, it's down by 0.6%, followed by financials. It's really only services and holding firms that are holding the fort here. And speaking of Goldman Sachs and speaking of UPS convincing their workers to be vaccinated, you've also got the outsourcing sector here in the Philippines looking at a long-term work from home solution setup. here. And this is according to Ray Untal. He is, of course, the head of the IBPAP, or the IT and Business Process Association. They want the government to allow outsourcing firms, at least in PEZA zones, to implement work from home setups beyond March 2022. Now, currently, around 65% of the association's enterprises are running 70% work from home setup. More than 100 companies are now at 90 to 100% work from home arrangement. He did also mention that 45% of real estate demand nationwide comes from the outsourcing sector. You can see, as I mentioned, the property space actually dragging down the bourse here, with SM Prime, the biggest loser, down by 1.4%. And there's one sector that I do want to watch out for, that is the telcos. This, as the foreign utilities are opposing the proposals to retain the status of telco companies here as a public utility, and that would be limiting foreign ownership here in the sector. Of course, you've got Senate Bill 2094 to amend that Public Service Act, wherein right now the limitation on foreign ownership is at 40%. The groups are saying that allowing foreign competition into the country would improve, of course, the quality and connectivity of our telco players. You can see PLDT up by 1.5%, and Globe as well jumping by 1% at the open. Here are the other headlines we're keeping our eyes on. The Philippines will receive $2.8 billion worth of special drawing rights, or SDRs, from the International Monetary Fund. Now, the IMF distributed a record $650 billion in SDRs to their members on Monday to help countries recover from the pandemic. Now, around $275 billion of the SDRs will go to emerging and developing countries. The global lender said countries can tap the newly allocated SDRs to boost reserve buffers to ease financial constraints and lower borrowing costs. These may also be exchanged into usable currencies for countries with liquidity constraints and those needing additional spending. ING Bank senior economist Nikki Mapa said the SDR boost is a welcome development as the country faces continued uncertainties from the pandemic. Mapa expects that this will strengthen the peso in the short term, since the SDRs would give a confidence boost in the country's external buffers. Now, House lawmakers approved on second reading a bill exempting from taxes the gifts and cash rewards athletes and coaches get for participating in international competitions. House Bill number 9990, also known as the Hidilyn Diaz Act, will also make prizes deductible against the recipient's gross income in computing the donor's income tax. This tax relief is valid for the year before an athlete competes in an international sports competition and 3 months after the event. Now, if signed into law, the tax exemptions will retroact to June 1st, 2021, to cover incentives given to athletes and coaches who participated in the Tokyo Olympics. Now, as everything from concerts to business seminars to yoga sessions go digital, content sharing platforms are booming as a way for people to not only stream, but also to connect in a socially distanced world. Now, here to chat with us about how the pandemic changed the game, we have with us Gautam Talwar. He's the Managing Director of Spotify Asia Pacific. Good morning, Gautam, and welcome to Businessworld Live.
Good morning, Danie. Thank you for having me.
Gautam, let's kick off with how the pandemic changed your business model. Of course, it's a digital platform, so you were very much forward, looking there even before this all happened. But tell us, what sort of shifts happened here? Did you need to make a lot of different changes because of the situation?
Yes, thank you, Danie. I mean, let me start by saying, the pandemic has been difficult for our listeners, our creators, our partners globally, and Philippines is no different. However, music and podcasts in many ways have turned out to be the antidote in this new normal. The silver lining that we are seeing is it has accelerated the adaptation of how consumers consume their media, but as well as how creators find an audience and connect with their fans. To give you a higher point, Spotify has had an exciting run in the Philippines. We are seeing an audio renaissance as we speak. and Spotify is at the forefront of helping push that forward. We're the leading audio network in the world, and in many ways, the Philippines has been a shining star for us. It is a large, young, mobile first region that has really given us a lot of signals for how to adapt through the pandemic. We've seen how streaming has had a revolutionary impact on the recorded music industry in the last 10 years, and we're now beginning to see that in other forms of audio, such as podcasts. And as a company, our highlight at Spotify has been on how we adapt the product experience to the new normal and to the considerations of local consumers and creators. And we are seeing an exciting lineup of innovations that we've had to accelerate to not only deliver an enhanced creator experience, but also deepen the way our listeners seek out of audio. To build a bit on this, we have data on both sides. On the listener side, what we are seeing is streaming has been a resilient source. It has been an anchor point for our consumers. We are seeing them spend more time on music as well as podcasts. And as an industry, the recorded music industry revenue from streaming has actually grown in 2020.
Okay.
So reliant and resilient source of revenue at a time when other forms of avenue like live and touring have been limited for our creator community. But then on the other hand, on the listener side, we are seeing some very interesting insights in our research of the Filipino consumer. And one interesting research that we were able to unpack through our Culture Next report is how 85% plus of our Gen Z and millennial audiences in the Philippines are leaning into audio to relieve them of their stress, whether it is a pick me up, whether it is relaxation, or to be better informed. Audio has been a companion for them throughout the day, and we've adapted with an exciting lineup of product innovations to be able to meet this new need from our consumers. On the
Gautam,
thing,
can I just interrupt? I'm just curious to know whether this trend. You mentioned that audio is being a reprieve. It's some sort of escape from the pandemic. Is this sort of trend going to be continuing now as the world starts to reopen, travel starts to come back? You've got concerts hopefully coming back as well. Tell us how do you envision that? Is this just a temporary surge?
yes, we're seeing ourselves in a golden age for audio. We have not only seen that in a diversity of music that is popping out of the platform, but also on our podcast side. And we think that this is here to stay, and we are building on for that. Some examples are how radio is being replicated in a new form, in new ways on audio. And we've got some exciting developments that we announced earlier this year. The first piece inspired by radio and how people want to consume their radio, but they want to now do it on demand and in a more interactive way, is our big initiative around Your Daily Drive. What we saw is in our heydays, we all grew up, and usually it was tuning into a linear radio service and catching up with a radio jockey who is unpacking a song that helps land the track, or a music journalist that is tracking the rise of a big artist. We are replicating the same with Your Daily Drive, which is our big innovation on Spotify. It is a playlist that brings together news and talk commentary that is very akin to radio, but also brings it together with personalized music that is in the right mood of the user. So if you are sad and if you prefer morning music that is a pick me up, that's going to show up on your daily drive. If you like to be better informed with the kind of content you're going to pop into a TV5 show or CNN or a BBC show. So in many ways, we've adapted to the new normal, except it is on demand and
Okay.
interactive.
Give us some idea here of the number of Filipino users. We're just very curious. The status of Spotify in the Philippines. What is the demographic here? How many users? How much growth has been seen in recent years since you entered the market? And what are your realistic targets?
Well, what I can share is we're a global leader. At the end of Q2, we touched about 365 million users globally, and 165 million of them were paying subscribers. And the Philippines is a high growth market for us. We've been operating here since 2014. It is a shining star for us and has continued to grow for us through this pandemic.
Okay, Gautam, finally, just a general question here on taxing big tech. That's been an issue, especially during the pandemic, with the tech companies still doing very very well. You've got countries like Chile taxing up to 90%, some at 5%. The Philippines is pushing for 12% on subscription-based services. Is this fair? And how would that in any way change your plans for the Philippines?
Well, Spotify is a global company. We operate in about 178 countries, and as an entity, we always strive to comply with the local tax laws of every country that we operate in, and Philippines is no different. What I would call out is our mission remains unchanged, and it is to give our Filipino consumers an experience by bringing the best and all of the music and the podcasts in the world in a way that they see fit, and match them with creators who have a global platform at Spotify to help build their audience and an income stream. We've seen some great results even through the pandemic. Creators such as SP19, Zach Tabudlo that have popped, and we see that growth story in the music and the podcast continue for Spotify through the new normal.
Okay, so audio as well as radio here to stay, and the Philippines a hot market despite, of course, these ongoing tax concerns for you guys. There's still enough growth for you to make this worth it. Thank you so much for those insights. That was Gautam Talwar, Managing Director of Spotify Asia Pacific.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
And that's a first look into the business day. Today is Wednesday, August 25th, 2021. Catch Businessworld Live for the market closes at 3:15 p.m. today. I'm Danie Laurel. Mask on, wash hands, stay safe, Philippines. We are One News.